Hello everyone, thank you for joining me. In April, I chose my entire TBR from award-winning or nominated books. I read some great entries from the Booker Prize, the Women's Prize, the Pulitzer, the Hugo, and the Nobel Prizes. So in today's video, let's look at all of the Booker Prize books first. I have winners and nominees starting from the year 2000 all the way up to 2025, including some titles that are currently in the running for winning this year's International Booker Prize. Let's dive in. The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood. This is the winner of the 2000 Booker Prize. This story follows sisters Iris and Laura, who live in a fictional Canadian town called Ticonderoga. Iris is married to a very wealthy industrialist called Richard Griffin, and Laura, her younger sister, was revealed to have been killed in a car accident at the very beginning of the story. So apparently, Laura drove off a bridge in Iris's car, and that is how this entire story begins. Iris is telling this story from a first-person perspective as an elderly woman in her 80s. So we both see her in her present life and her reminiscing of her childhood with Laura, how they grew up, how her marriage with Richard came to be, and just everything that goes on in their lives. So The Blind Assassin is a story-in-story that's contained within this novel. It is supposedly kind of a manuscript that Iris has found after Laura's death, so then it was published posthumously under Laura's name. So this story within the story is a dystopian sci-fi that an unnamed man is telling his girlfriend about. It takes place in a city called Sakyo-Norn, located on a planet called Zychron. This is a very bleak world where children are enslaved and they're made to make these very intricate carpets for the rich until they go blind. And people would use how many children a carpet has blinded as an evaluation of how valuable it is, like how intricate it is and how much workmanship it took. And Iris and Laura's sisterly story that Iris is reminiscing about mostly took place during the Great Depression and during World War I. So as you can see, there are many themes that are reflected in this story. There's societal inequality, exploitation, people being separated due to war, and there is also indication of sexism, given that Iris's father pretty much married her into Richard Griffin's family kind of as a bargaining chip. So Iris entered this marriage knowing that she would be unhappy, and it's only a way for her father to avoid complete decline of their family. Basically, it was just using her to connect with the wealth and prominence of the Griffin family. As much as I acknowledge that all of these themes that are touched on by this story are very important and very worthy of discussion, I really don't think I enjoyed the execution. I found the narrative pacing to be very slow, especially when Iris was talking about this very long-winded history of her family, reminiscing all the way back to the times before she was born, and there were like lengthy discussions of her and Laura's childhood, and then sort of every detail of them socializing in this upper-class world with other people that are even more prominent than them, what they were wearing, the cereal that they were eating. I feel like there are just so many narrative details included in it, and the inclusion of the story felt quite sporadic, and I wasn't really sure what the point of that story is until very late in the entire novel. This is a over 500-page chonker, and it very much felt like a slog throughout much of it. Another issue that I had with this story was that I really did not like the protagonist. So this is kind of a bigger issue for me when a story is written from the first-person perspective. So I am listening to someone telling a story through the voice of I, and I did this, and my sister, and my family. And if I really do not like who I is, then I find myself very quickly detaching from the story. And then I just kind of struggling to care about the conflict and the stake in any of the struggles or the internal tension within the family if I don't really like who I is. I mean, yes, there is this Great Depression happening, but Iris came from a rather prominent industrialist family and then very quickly got married into another very prominent, wealthy industrialist family. So it really didn't feel like the social background was all that relevant to their lives. And their experience regarding World War I was just through their kind of ambiguous friendship with this character called Alex. And there might possibly be some kind of romantic rivalry between them. So basically, they know someone who went to the war, and that was kind of the entire historical background relevance to this story. And I also felt like the way that Iris remembers Laura and their childhood and their time together just seemed completely untouched by the grief that I feel like a reasonable sister would have felt if you begin a story by your sister's death and then you reminisce about your time together. I feel like I was expecting a little bit more, I guess, sentimentality than what the author showed here. I didn't feel like I sensed much in the way of sisterhood or really strong bonding between these two characters. So overall, I feel like I had a very conflicted experience with this book because I am very interested in these issues that the author is bringing up, like gender and economic inequality and instability and war and how that affects people and affects families. But I felt like overall, I was just reading about the internal family drama of a very wealthy, very insulated group of people. If you've read this book, I'm very curious what your experience is. Do you think I've misread the author's intention or execution, and what your opinions are about The Blind Assassin by Margaret Atwood? Milkman by Anna Burns. This is the winner of the 2018 Booker Prize. This story is set in Northern Ireland during the Troubles. So the Troubles was a armed, militarized conflict within Northern Ireland that happened between the 1960s all the way up to 1998, ending with the Good Friday Agreement. It was a conflict between loyalists and nationalists. So the loyalists are Protestant and they want Northern Ireland to remain part of the UK, whereas the nationalists are Catholic and they want Northern Ireland to become part of the Republic of Ireland. So this involved a lot of sporadic guerrilla campaigns, shootings, and car bombs, and overall more than 3,500 people were killed during the Troubles. It was a very unstable time for Northern Irish society. In this story, a young girl has attracted the attention of an older man that's only known as Milkman. So he's this rather mysterious figure who is connected with the Troubles. He is a prominent kind of paramilitary figure that everyone is rather afraid of. She keeps running into him regardless of her unwillingness to have a relationship with this man. And to make matters worse, the townsfolk seem to be very quick to start rumors that she is actually engaged in a relationship with this person. The more I read this story, the more I started to realize that Milkman is actually a metaphoric kind of boogeyman that really represents what the conflict, the Troubles, is doing to the local community. There is an expression in this story called over the road, which is kind of a metaphor for people being very deeply divided over religion and over political choices. So people that were previously friends and neighbors now became us versus them. Whether someone is of the right religion and which side of the conflict are they connected with just completely changed things. So reading this story as an American reader, seeing this very intense, polarized us versus them kind of thinking pattern play out in another community, it is kind of chilling and saddening. And knowing how this conflict turned out and how bloody it became, it is a little bit worrying for other people that are in a similar political setting. This was a very intense reading experience. I found it very difficult to put the book down, and I was constantly worried about this protagonist protagonist and just wondering what's going to happen to her next. I don't know what was scarier, this sense of insidious danger and threat that the Milkman represents, or how much the entire community seemed to have turned against itself. It's like every corner that she turns, someone is taking photos of her. She feels like the neighbors are watching her and judging her, and she doesn't know what people are saying about her in town. She doesn't know who to trust. Not to mention the fact that a lot of men are radicalized and armed and militarized. It really changes the power imbalance between the genders as well. So that also affected the community on a very deep level. Overall, I found this to be a very poignant, very gripping reflection of the Troubles. Even as an international reader, I felt like I was thrown right into the middle of the conflict by this narrative. So overall, it was a very tense but great reading experience. My Sister, the Serial Killer by Oyinkan Braithwaite. This was longlisted for 2019's Booker Prize. This story is set in Lagos, Nigeria, and it begins by Korede trying to help her sister Ayula get rid of a dead body. This is the third time that Ayula has killed a boyfriend, and in this case it was Femi, whom she had only been dating for a month. She had stabbed him in the back with her knife, and we see Korede trying to clean up the blood left behind by the murder and also trying to wrap the dead body in a sheet like a mummy to smuggle him out of a hotel. So how does Ayula quite literally get away with murder? It is because she is very beautiful, and she seems to have the power to seduce and manipulate any men that she wants, and she has had a strong influence over men ever since she was very young. And Korede has had to live with this pretty much all her life, and very often clean up her sister's mess. This writer has a very direct, very bare kind of writing style. She doesn't use a whole lot of adjectives or adverbs or long sentences of descriptors and long paragraphs of pure imagery, but she did an amazing job making the reader visualize the extent of Ayula's beauty just through how other people around her respond to her and how other people comment on her and treat her because of her beauty. And on the part of the main character, Korede, her reaction to her sister's beauty isn't really one of jealousy. You can sense this strong sisterly bond and affection that's very deep within the psyche of this character. She is very likable in that way. And I think she kind of sees her sister's beauty and the power of it as a unique monster that she has to live with. And in many cases, she is the one who had to bear the aftermath of this monster's actions. This is a very tightly paced and gripping story, and is written with very clear and concise language. I think you will really enjoy reading this one. The Memory Police by Yoko Ogawa. This book was shortlisted for the 2020 International Booker Prize. Although it did not win, but I think this book probably received a little bit more attention and discussion across social media compared to the winner of that year. This book was originally published in 1994. It takes place on an unnamed Japanese island where things are disappearing, and it seems like people's memory and sensation and knowledge of these items disappear with them as well. For example, when perfume disappeared, even though the protagonist's mother secretly kept a bottle, she had lost the ability to smell perfume after the disappearance of it. And it started with small personal items such as perfume or hats or ribbons, and then it gradually became things that seem essential to nature, such as birds and roses. They just all disappeared. And when these disappearances are supposed to happen, people kind of inexplicably gather and voluntarily discard these items that were previously in their possession. And the memory police exist to enforce the disappearances and make sure that people forget all of the items that are supposed to disappear. They would go to great length to make sure that all documents and all records regarding these disappeared items are destroyed. And they would even go so far far as taking away people who are incapable of forgetting. And these people that are arrested by the memory police are either simply disappear and are never heard of again, or are returned to their family as a corpse. The protagonist is a novelist who writes about losses. Her current work is a former singer who has lost her voice, and she is working with her editor R to bring this story to its completion. And this project that she's working on became a brilliant story contained within this novel. And her editor R is one of these people that cannot forget, that might be targeted by the memory police. This story bears influences from dystopian masterpieces such as 1984 and Fahrenheit 451 in its portrayal of surveillance and censorship, and the way that the story develops has a very Kafkaesque tone. This novel's writing style is probably a little bit different from what a typical science fiction fan would expect in a kind of fast-paced, gripping, cinematic, dystopian narrative. It is written in a style that I think is probably more common in Japanese literature, where the pacing is a little bit slower and you feel this kind of enveloping sadness in the writing itself. And it reads more like a literary fiction, but it is written very beautifully, and there are very poetic passages contained within this book. I find the brilliance of this novel is not only in the dystopian nightmare of surveillance and censorship, it is also in how people comply with these practices. What happens when people voluntarily discard bits and pieces of their life in response to the government's censorship? I think this is a very relevant and poignant read for anyone who might be living under a government that is overreaching, putting forward unreasonable censorship efforts, and trying to ban books and erase information from the internet. I hope this serves as an inspiration for us to do what we can to protect our freedom of information and not let any external force make us forget. Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv by Andrey Kurkov. It begins on a September night in 2011 in the Lychakiv cemetery. An aging hippie called Alik and an ex-KGB officer called Captain Ryabtsev were gathered around a mysterious grave that allegedly contained the hand of Jimi Hendrix that apparently was smuggled out of the United States and buried in this cemetery in Ukraine. Now, this, of course, is all fictional. So this ex-KGB officer and a former subversive in the Soviet era were united by their love of rock music. And in another part of the city, a cab driver called Taras was driving kidney stone patients over very uneven cobblestone roads to hope that the vibration would help them loosen up and pass their kidney stones. He calls it vibrotherapy. And Alik, Captain Ryabtsev, and Taras all start noticing these anomalies around the city of Lviv, where the air smelled very briny, kind of like the air from the sea, and seagulls were gathering overhead, crying and laughing and sometimes attacking people. So just a side note, the coastline of Ukraine is actually on the southern part of the country, whereas the city of Lviv is located in the northwest. So this is very much a landlocked city that is nowhere near the sea. As you can probably tell, this story is filled with absurdity and surrealism and dark humor, and it's offset by copious amounts of vodka and other Eastern European libations. So this is a very funny read, but I do think that underneath the humor, it is actually a very heartwarming story. I really liked how strong the friendship is between all of the characters in this book. Like, people would just jump into action the minute that they hear their friend is in trouble, and they're always willing to give each other a helping hand. So I really liked the relationship between the characters and the dynamic of their friendship. And I think another deeper layer of the story beneath the humor is this meditation on past and present, and how people can still live in their memories of the past, the bygone Soviet era, and how they sometimes feel like a misfit in modern society, and especially in the new capitalist reality of Ukraine. It is definitely a funny page turner, but it's also cozy in its own way, and it has some deeper and philosophical layers that are worth reflecting on. I haven't seen this book receive much attention or hype across social media. I think it is rather a hidden gem of the Booker Prize bibliography, and I really hope you pick up a copy. Jimi Hendrix Live in Lviv by Andrey Kurkov. Hunchback by Saou Ichikawa. This book was longlisted for the 2025 International Booker Prize, but it was not selected for the shortlist. It features a disabled protagonist who is wheelchair bound and she lives in an assisted living facility, but she is very wealthy, so she spends most of her time writing erotic articles and she doesn't really need the income from that, so she donates all of it and she also tweets like very incendiary messages all over social media. She does all of this through an alias, but one day she receives a mail carrier who reveals that he followed her on social media and he had seen all of these inappropriate tweets and he's read the erotic articles that she had written. I have rather mixed feelings about this book. I do find it a little bit too morally gray for someone to proposition a carer who is under medical duty to provide a certain service and a degree of care to them. And also, just in terms of plot, most of the happenings in this novel are just sexual acts. And this is a very short book. So I listened to it on audiobook and it was only about a 2-hour length. And I've seen a few negative reviews online where people have purchased brand new hardcover copies for quite an expensive price, and they are disappointed in how short the story is and how there really isn't much plot to it. However, I should point out that the book puts forward a very important issue, which is kind of the ableism privilege in the reading and book review community. The author highlights how difficult it can be for a disabled person to hold and read a physical book for a prolonged periods of time, and how when book lovers online talk about how they enjoy the smell of the book and the weight of the pages, it's really kind of an annoying privilege boasting of ableism. I do think that that's an interesting issue that definitely make me reflect on my own, I guess, able-bodied privilege that I have not seen brought up by other works. However, the issue remains that as a novel, there really isn't much plot to this book aside from the sexual acts. I do understand that this is a juxtaposition of erotic desires and erotic actions against the societal prejudice of disabled bodies as not sexual or not desirable. But I cannot honestly say that I enjoyed the execution of these ideas. I think this book is maybe meant to be a little bit provocative. It's meant to make you think about these possibly incendiary issues and ideas, but I don't see this ranking very high in my overall reading experience of the Booker Prize. Under the Eye of the Big Bird by Hiromi Kawakami. This book was shortlisted for the 2025 International Booker Prize, so it is currently in the running to win. This story is set in a distant future where animals, plants, and humans can be made in factories. Humans are derived from animal stem cells because the ones that are derived from humans are more likely to mutate. So this is a very strange future where the human population is on the brink of collapse and the world is divided into many isolated communities. And each of these isolated groups have their own, shall we say, quirks, from men being very unlikely to survive and women being the majority of the population, to children that mutate and have psychic abilities, some of them can read minds, to green people that can photosynthesize like plants. So this story kind of comes together like a big puzzle where the reader have to do a little bit of work kind of trying to understand each segment and each group and how they are interconnected with each other and how everything comes together and kind of comes full circle at the end. But this work that you put into reading this narrative, I think, is really worth it. This is a very unique setting and plot, and after finishing this book, I can genuinely say I've never read anything quite like it. Most of this story is written from the first-person perspective, but who I is kind of kept changing throughout the book. That's why it might be just a tiny bit challenging for the reader, because you kind of have to suss out who the person is and which group they're talking about and how all of these groups are interconnected together. This author is very good at delivering a lot of information with very few words, so you really feel like the scope of this story is very sweeping. It's expansive through both space and time. As I said before, this story is currently in the running to win this year's International Booker Prize, and I am very much rooting for it. So those were the great books that I've read from 2.5 decades of the Booker Prize. I think ever since I learned about this prize, I've found some of my all-time favorite books among the winners and nominees of the Booker and the International Booker Prize. And that's why, as an American reader from all the way across the pond, I will continue to follow this prize and see what it offers all of us. So this will be part 1 of my April reading wrap-up. In part 2, I will talk about books that I've selected from the Women's Prize, the Pulitzer, the Hugo, and the Nobel Prizes. Please subscribe and turn on notifications to not miss a future review. And please also let me know in the comments below what you thought of my selection, what you thought of the review of these books, and whether you've read something from the Booker Prize that ended up becoming one of your favorite books. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.